Welcome to the Fact Hunter channel. In today's episode, we will tell the story of the world's richest spy. Enjoy the broadcast. Residents of Thompson, Connecticut, have long considered wealthy Count Anastazy Andriejewicz Wasiacki-Wąsiacki an eccentric. If he had been poor, he would have been considered a lunatic. He lived on a fabulous 100-acre estate, where he painted swastikas on turtles and let them roam free to wander around. Some knew him as WW, others as Count, others as millionaire. He sympathized with the Nazis long before the United States entered the war with Germany in early December 1941. The Count, a tall and burly man with a pleasant disposition, used to tell people during his walks in the neighborhood that he could head a government set up in the Soviet Union after Germany conquered that country and executed Joseph Stalin. He assured many people that he would take them with him to Russia and appoint them to high state positions. What the neighbors didn't know was that the 48-year-old self-proclaimed aristocrat was the leader of a branching underground Ukrainian organization whose goal was to overthrow the US government and install a Nazi regime. Without a doubt, the Count was the world's richest spy. As a teenager, WW fought in Ukraine in the army of Tsar Nicholas II against the revolutionaries. After the victory of the Bolsheviks and the execution of the Tsar in 1917, WW fled to Paris, where he found work as a chauffeur. His flamboyant physique and pleasant personality attracted the attention of one of America's richest women, Marion Buckingham Ream Stevens, ex-wife of Norman F. Ream, a Chicago financier. The penniless young chauffeur and Miss Stevens, 22 years his senior, were married in Paris 6 months after they met. WW immediately gave himself a false title of earldom. 20 years later, in 1939, the Count first came to the attention of the FBI. At the time, he left his Connecticut residence for New York to bail out Fritz Kuhn, a former chemist at the Ford plant and now the leader of the German-American Society, a Nazi organization in the United States. Kuhn was jailed for disorderly conduct and drunkenness. Although neighbors treated the Count as a harmless freak, the FBI considered him a dangerous, pro-Nazi radical, especially when agents learned from workers that he had built a concrete bunker on a hill within his property, with walls 60 centimeters thick. Holes along each wall housed machine guns, and a rotating gun turret on top. Beginning in 1939, the Count formed a secret military unit, training its members on his mountainous, desolate estate. Guarded by private detectives and howling ogres, it concealed an arsenal of weapons, machine guns, grenades, and explosives. WW was particularly proud of his squad of young Americans of Ukrainian descent. He personally trained these ready-for-anything losers in sabotage and stealth. In early February 1942, when the states had already been in the war for 2 months, the Count got into a chauffeur-driven limousine and rushed to Camden, New Jersey. Little did he know that he was being followed by 2 agents. In Camden, W entered the home of Gerhard Wilhelm Kunz, who had replaced the discredited drunkard and womanizer Fritz Kuhn as Bundesführer of the German-American Society. The feds knew all about Kunz. The FBI had been watching him for months, but had not gathered enough evidence to convict him of subversive activities. As the agents kept vigil in an unmarked car parked nearby on the street, another familiar figure appeared at Kunz's residence and went inside. It was Kurt Molzahn, a Lutheran clergyman from Philadelphia. The ex-official of the German army and Nazi warmonger received funds and orders from Berlin through the German consulate in Philadelphia. As night fell, FBI agents saw through binoculars 3 Nazis bending over a map of the United States and engaged in animated conversation. The trackers deduced that something big was brewing. On the morning of the next day, the Count boarded a train to Chicago. 2 agents were traveling in the adjacent compartment. Upon arriving in the city, WW took a cab to Dr. Otto Wilhelmate, a large, square-jawed man with a dual scar on his cheek. Known among local Nazis and their sympathizers as Otto Scar, he headed a spy network out of the German House, a popular Chicago bar. Wilhelm Kunz soon arrived at Wilhelmate's home, and an hour later, Dr. Wolfgang Ebel, a naturalized American with a thriving medical practice in El Paso, Texas, joined the chat. After the conference, the conspirators dispersed throughout the United States. The FBI tracked each of them, traveling in luxury, as befitted a holder of fortune. The Count crisscrossed the country. Agents noticed that he always acted the same way. Upon arriving at a shipyard or armaments factory, he would hold a telephone conversation from a booth, wait in a limousine, And after a few minutes, a worker would emerge from the plant. His chauffeur would walk around as a lookout, and then the Count and the man could have a short chat and exchange envelopes. For several weeks, FBI agents followed the millionaire on his spy tour. Using information gained earlier, the trackers were able to identify some 35 suspects at shipyards and armaments factories. They decided to deal with them later. When the Count returned to his Connecticut estate, he was paid a visit by Philadelphia pastor Kurt Molzon. A few hours later, taking a large suitcase, he drove off in his car. The feds were convinced that the suitcase contained information on U.S. defense that the Count had collected during his trip. Instead of returning to Philadelphia, Molzon went to Chicago, where he delivered the luggage to Otto Skar Wilhelmate. Meanwhile, Dr. Wolfgang Ebel, following a meeting of Nazi espionage leaders in Chicago a few weeks earlier, again took up medical practice in El Paso. The seemingly omnipresent Wilhelm Kunz was heading to El Paso at the same time that Wilhelmate was traveling from Chicago to take the precious suitcase to Ebel. On the second day after receiving the shipment from Wilhelmate, Ebel and Kunz crossed the bridge over the Rio Grande into Mexico, heading directly to a fishing village 8 kilometers south of Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico. At the request of the feds, the pursuers were intercepted by Mexican police. Soon, a local undercover officer observed Ebel and Kunz carrying a suitcase to 2 fishermen who had previously been bribed by Nazi spies. FBI agents in El Paso were convinced that Mexican accomplices, who were not interested in ideology but only in dollars, had arranged an encounter with a German submarine on the coast under cover of darkness, but the agents didn't care. As a result of counterintelligence operations that lasted more than 2 years, FBI plugs in all the armaments factories and shipyards visited by Wasiacki were given false information to fall into the hands of the Count's men. German spies thus received erroneous news about the defense of the United States. For months, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was in constant contact with the people overseeing the Count's spy network, but the superintendent refrained from acting until he was assured that the Justice Department would receive irrefutable evidence. Suddenly, Hoover gave the password to strike. Through a series of deft actions, the agents captured all 5 ringleaders of the network. The defendants appeared before federal judge J. Joseph Smith in Hartford, Connecticut in July 1942, and all but Lutheran pastor Kurt Molzon pleaded guilty. Molzon was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Later, under unexplained circumstances, the clergyman was released. Bundesfuhrer Wilhelm Kunz received the harshest sentence, 15 years in prison. Interestingly, the mastermind of the network of spies and saboteurs, Count Anastazy Andriejewicz Wąsiacki-Wąsiacki, received the most lenient treatment. He was sentenced to 5 years. It is possible that he sold out his associates in exchange for a reduced sentence. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel.